Kristen French is a scientist, a beekeeper, and she's running for Charleston County Council in 2020. I sit down exclusively with Kristen to talk about issues near and dear to her heart for a special edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And be sure to download the free Quintin's Close-Ups app in your Apple or Google Play stores. Listen to this interview Friday on my free Quintin's Close-Ups iHeartRadio podcast. And right now, subscribe to this YouTube channel. Kristen French, it's so good to meet you.
It's nice to meet you too, Quintin.
I appreciate this greatly. Obviously, you're running for Charleston County Council against Elliott Summey. And I want to go over to your Facebook page because you said this. I'm Kristen French, and I'm running for Charleston County Council in 2020 against Elliott Summey because we need leadership that values community over personal gain. What are you talking about when you think of personal gain?
Well, I've noticed that on county council in our area, that there seem to be a lot of people that are not well versed in conflict of interest. And so I see, for instance, deals like the MUSC incinerator facility that's being built out in North Charleston. And the Elliott Summey is a part of the company that will be building that. And I think that it somehow feels inappropriate for him to be involved in decisions about development in that area when he is going to gain from that.
What more questions do you have about that particular project?
I'd like to know how it got started, how the developer got involved, how MUSC decided that this was who they wanted to work with, and when did Elliott Summey get involved? He hasn't always been with that company, and it's not a local company either. So somehow he got involved in that, and I would like more transparency about that. And he hasn't mentioned this on his ethical reports, so it just feels like maybe there's not enough transparency there about his possible benefit from a contract that's involved in city and county government.
And I know you also said this too, that you basically want leadership over those personal gains. Talk to me about Kristen French. Who are you? How could you lead if you get on Charleston County Council, that is?
Well, I have lived in North Charleston for about 22 years, and I have been active in a lot of community advocacy issues. I feel that I have some good relationships with people in the community, and I understand the issues for the area of the county in terms of not just North Charleston, but of course Mount Pleasant, which is also in my district. So I think that as I go forward, I'm always going to try to be in communication with constituents and letting them know that I want to hear their concerns and that I want to work with them to find ways that we can solve problems that work for all the members of the community. So, for instance, I don't know if you remember this, but many years ago, one of the county incinerator that was near Union Heights was planned to be shut down, and then all of a sudden it was back on for another 20-year contract. And the community residents that live right across the street from that incinerator were very upset. They felt they had been promised that this air polluting facility was going away. And so I was there when they had public hearings, and I wanted to help people speak out for their neighborhood. And I would have been, if I had been on council at that time, I would have been asking a lot of questions about how this deal came up at the last minute. And why were they doing this when it would impact people who have had environmental justice issues for years and years.
When you look back at that to right now, what more is still playing in your mind about that issue?
I think that community is still having a lot of problems getting headway in terms of making sure that their needs are met. They are concerned about the issues with the port facility coming in and how air pollution from truck traffic can impact them. And I know that what came out of that, and probably also was stimulated by the incinerator incident, is the Low Country Alliance for Model Communities, which has done a lot of work to try to protect neighborhoods in southern North Charleston. And I think that we need to work with groups like that to make sure that any planning and zoning that we do as we go forward will benefit the people who live there. So, for instance, there are a lot of people on fixed incomes that may feel concerned about any new development that's coming into the area because their property taxes will go up. And would they be able to afford that even if they own their home outright? Well, we need to find ways to work with people so that they can stay in their homes. And we need to find ways to develop a community that benefits the people who live there and that provides more affordable housing and provides more economic opportunity for everyone. It's also really important in terms of looking at how density can help with that and how density should be monitored so that it doesn't hurt the community. So you need high density so you can have better public transportation and more walkability and more bikeability. But you have the whole infrastructure, the holistic approach to forming a community that can thrive for people who live there and people who are coming there so that everyone can be together.
How do you define it? Is it affordable housing, attainable housing, or workforce housing in your mind?
Affordable housing is something that's traditionally been defined as linked to the area median income. So, and that's defined by HUD, the Housing and Urban Development. So when I think about affordable housing, I'm thinking we need to look at people who can afford housing at about 30% of their income or less. And those incomes need to be reflected in the 30 to 150% of the median income. We need to look at it based on that. Because we know that right now we do not have enough housing for people in that range of income. We have almost zero housing for people at 30% of the median income. So there's nothing available for someone who can only afford $500 in rent a month. There's just nothing. So if we can't look at the people who are struggling to make ends meet, to live in a place that's clean and healthy, if we can't work to help them, we're undermining our entire community. So we have to look at what do they need to be able to survive with their families? How can they live close to where they work? How can work be closer to where they live? We need to look at all of these issues together. And so when I look at affordable housing, I'm talking about everybody. And a person that earns, 200% of the median income doesn't need to be spending more than 30% of their income on housing either. But if we don't have housing for the lowest at a reasonable rate, we're not going to have it for the highest either.
And when you talked earlier about density, how would that look in 2020 in your mind?
It's really interesting in 2020. That's coming up really close. So I think that there's not a lot of changes that can happen in North Charleston that would increase density. For instance, it would take a longer time. But I think you do need to look at more apartment buildings like you would see in some of the larger cities.
Sure.
Because apartment buildings are not our enemy. They can be done right. And so we need to make sure that we have density that reflects a way to have community between peoples of different incomes. And that also feels very welcoming to everybody involved. So if I'm going into a new place to live, I want to know that all my neighbors are interested in the neighborhood too,
Okay.
And the building, keeping the building up, and being friendly with each other. That's something that's been harder and harder to have in our society, that we feel more and more isolated from each other. But in the communities where I have visited and lived in the past, I've seen high density housing that really works well for people. And so I think that we don't need to be afraid of high density, but I think that we need to look at it in terms of how can we make it both attractive in terms of aesthetics, but also in terms of how it feels like a home for people. So, for instance, at the Naval Hospital property, where they're talking about selling to a developer who has a history of turning old buildings into flats that are attractive for people to live in. I believe he's been involved with the Clarko development recently, and that's office space. So that if that building stays, and if we had another apartment building nearby on that same property, would that be a bad thing? Probably not, but you have to do it right. You have to take everyone in the community's concerns into account. So the neighborhood around that, where there are a lot of older homes, and there's rental homes, we need to make sure that those people are getting the resources they need to keep up their homes, to work with their landlords, so that they have safe and clean and healthy places to live. So if there are problems, within a block of the Naval Hospital property, we've got to address that too. So some of that affordable housing has to come in rehabbing homes and helping people to rehab the homes they live in so that they don't have to move away because their utilities are out of control. Those kinds of issues are all important. So some of the density would be new, but some of the things that we have already would stay the same. It would just be that we would improve the quality of living in the places they live in now.
And I want to go back to the Naval Hospital in just a minute. You talked earlier about property taxes, and obviously there's going to be a new, I guess, for lack of a better word, causeway for the ports, trucks and whatnot. How much would that be for the average taxpayer or resident in that area come 2022, 2023?
How much property tax? Well, that's a difficult question because there are a lot of things pulling at trying to raise property taxes in order to fund different programs. But one of the affordable housing initiatives does have a 1 mil tax proposed, I believe, and that one would possibly impact people in terms of, I believe it's $10 or $20 per $100,000 home per year. So if I own a $200,000 home, then maybe I'm going to pay an extra $20 a year on my property tax. And given that that home is probably paying around $1,000 a year, that might be significant for some people. It might be not a problem for some people. It depends on your overall housing cost, obviously. So that's not a huge ask, but I know there are other people that are talking about raising it further, and there are also initiatives that are calling for not just the county to raise a 1 mil tax, but the cities to do it as well. So you could see 2 or 3 taxes on each resident. So that might be, instead of $20 to $40 a year, $30 to $60 a year. So those are the kind of things I think are possibly coming down the pike, and I am supportive of that. But I also want to look at how can we make it less regressive if we need to. So if a person has a $100,000 home and they're on a fixed income and they really cannot afford any increases in their property taxes, how can we work with them to make sure that they're not going to be hurt by something that's supposed to make their housing more affordable? Even if we're looking at raising property taxes to improve affordable housing options, we need to look at the people who have lower income of that own property, or that rent and are having higher rents because of property tax increases for the landlord. We need to look at how we're going to help those people adjust to those new expenses. Do we want to hurt people at the lower incomes with a property tax increase that's for affordable housing? That doesn't make sense. So we need to look at ways that we can make sure that we aren't hurting people at the lowest levels of income in their attempts to get to affordable housing. So I do recognize that although for myself and for some people, $30 to $60, $10, $30, $60 a year may not be very much. For other people who are living, paycheck to paycheck or disability check to disability check, it can be a big problem. So we have to recognize that people are in all different kinds of situations, and that it's our responsibility in government to try to find ways to help people bridge those gaps so that they can live a high quality of life.
How many more gaps do we have in this area?
Can you be a little more specific about what you mean by gaps?
You just talked about property taxes, affordable housing. How many more gaps do we have with that?
Well, one of the issues that people have in terms of, I would say, equity gaps is affordable transportation.
Okay.
So we don't have a public transportation system that does everything it needs to for people who don't have a car or who can't afford a car. And the streets at this point, we know, are pretty unsafe for pedestrians and bicyclists. So we need to do some things that address both the bus issues and the bicycling issues and pedestrian issues. And some of those things can be done quickly, like maybe we need more crosswalks on our busier streets. Some people have said, well, you just need to walk down to the traffic light to cross the street at the crosswalk. But if those traffic lights are half a mile apart and your only way to get to work is to cross that 4-lane highway, you may not have time to go out of your way 20 minutes walking to get to work. So you have to recognize that this is an access issue for people who want to work and want to go to school and want to do the things that make them contributors to society. So we need to make sure that we are making the streets safer for people to cross the street where it makes sense for them to cross the street. So, up and down Rivers Avenue, there are places where there just aren't any crosswalks at all. And so people are endangered no matter where they cross the street. And there are too many gaps between even just traffic intersections, traffic lights, for them to find a safe place to cross. So we need to look at how we're planning our roads in general, but we need to look at the current roads and see what can we do right now that would make things safer for pedestrians and bicyclists. And we also need to push harder in terms of finding ways to increase the frequency of routes so that people don't have to wait an hour for every single stop. If you show up to your stop and you just barely miss the bus, you have to wait another hour to get a bus. And that can mean that you have to plan so far ahead for even a doctor's appointment that's maybe going to take 15 minutes. And, from my area of town, which is inside 526, I live near Park Circle, it takes me over an hour and a half to get to an MUSC on the bus. If I'm going to a doctor's appointment, the logical choice for me is to drive and park. And that's an expense too. But I would love to support the public transportation system. But if it's going to take me 3 to 4 hours to go to a 15-minute doctor's appointment, how can I make that choice to support public transportation?
Let me reset because we're just a mile away from the Ashley River Bridge, and as you know, there's a push to get a pedestrian bike lane on that bridge. Where are you in this discussion?
I think that we need to look at options for pedestrians getting over the Ashley River. I've heard there's 2 proposals in the works, but the one I heard about most recently was in a separate bridge, or a pedestrian bridge, as opposed to a lane. So I support looking at these different options and finding the right one. I think that the county government needs to be supportive of this as well. Some of this is happening in city jurisdiction, but if the county can be supportive in ways that help reduce traffic overall, that's good for everybody. So I see people riding their bikes across that
Oh, yes.
small Ashley River Bridge now, and I know that they feel unsafe. Those lanes are already pretty narrow for the traffic that goes across in cars. So to ride your bike across, it's pretty scary, I imagine.
You talked earlier about this 526. How do you support it? Do you support it or are you against it?
The 526 extension.
Yes, ma'am.
What I am against is the current contract proposal that we have. We have seen that. So here's a situation where the county government is doing some kind of deals with the state government, and by the time it comes out, we find that they're trying to use our sales tax that we voted for in 2016 to pay for this. And we didn't sign up for that. In fact, if you go back and you can look at county council meetings, there was a lot of discussion about whether or not the I-526 extension should be on that ballot question. And they made sure it was not. They said this was a separate issue. This money would not be used for I-526 extension. And now they're vocally telling the state government, the state infrastructure bank, and the joint bond review committee that they are going to use that money, that same money they said they would not use for this project. That's the money they want to use. So my point is that if you're going to build this road, if this road is really needed, then you need to be willing to find new funding for it. So I don't think it's appropriate to take funding from the sales tax that we already voted on to use for that project. We have lots of projects that need high priority, including the bus rapid transit system, and the roads projects that are already outlined. There may be enough money left over in the long run, but we can't afford for the county to continue to allocate money for 526 from those funds right now, because what they do when they do that is they are slowing down other projects that need those funds that have already started to come in.
What are those projects right now that should be focused on?
So there's several road projects that actually impact state roads like Highway 41, and they're the flyover at Maybank Heights.
Sure.
Their main road has been improved by some of the sales tax over in Johns Island. Is it Maybank or Main Road?
Right in that area,
Yeah.
yes.
So these are the kind of projects that we need to be looking at, and we need to realize that all of these projects need to be taken care of with the funding that we've already approved as with the voting citizens. And we need to also make sure that they don't impact the neighborhoods adversely. So, for instance, on Highway 41, there's some controversy about whether it should go through an older neighborhood or ramp. So we need to look at those kinds of issues as well. The other thing in terms of road maintenance is there are a lot of roads that are in bad shape and just need to be repaved or looked at in terms of flooding issues. So if we have roads and intersections that flood constantly, then we need to fix that, because that's also a traffic congestion issue and it's a safety issue. So that's not just in downtown Charleston. You know, there are several places in North Charleston that flood every time it rains hard, and it's hard to drive through. So there are a lot of places that need more higher priority, and in addition, we need to look at whether or not what was originally committed to Florida for the sales tax referendum is enough. Do we need to look at whether or not some more of that money needs to go to Florida? Or do we need to make sure that the first things that are allocated for some of these projects are for Florida, so that they can do things like increase route frequency or reduce limitations on senior bus passes and things like that.
And you talked earlier about obviously the old Naval Base, and I know that you are having some issues with transparency with that. What should be transparent when it comes to the old Naval Base in your mind?
Going forward, I think that we need to make sure we understand what we're getting into. So, for instance, if if the if Coxwell and his company want to purchase that building, well, we want to know what they're going to negotiate for. What in general, because I know that some of these are sensitive issues and they have to be handled in executive session. But at the same time, I want to know what are the priorities for the county council people in terms of negotiation. Are they going to negotiate for affordable housing on that property? Are they going to negotiate for making sure that some part of the development process is looking at bringing in a grocery store? Those are things that the community is very interested in and wants to know. So I'd like to know more about the priorities for those negotiations. And for whatever is not legally sensitive, I think they really need to do more to let us know what's going on. So,
And should this developer, how much should this developer contribute to this community in your mind?
well, that can be a very sticky issue, but I hope that all developers that come into our community want to contribute to the community in ways that will help their development thrive as well. So if the Naval Hospital is redeveloped into something beautiful, it has great office buildings, and has a wonderful vision for bringing in more employees and more residents, that's fantastic. But will anybody want to come if everybody around them is in, abject poverty? So we need to. Doesn't the developer want to do things that will help the surrounding community to do better, so that everybody feels that their quality of life is improved, and that as a result, everyone in that area's got a better quality of life? People are going to want to come there.
Let me take you back to 526. You said earlier that obviously county council perhaps misled some of these folks on where the money would go and how it would be spent. Who should be accountable right now?
Who should be accountable right now? That is a good question. I really look to the Joint Bond Review Committee in terms of their oversight. I think they're doing a good job of trying to understand what is going on, and I know that the chair of the subcommittee that's reviewing this pointed out that he had some questions about where's the funding coming from, and is this a good deal for the county? And I really appreciate that Mr. Alexander's looking at that. So I really want to, as chair of the county council, I want Elliott Summey to answer a few questions. Why does he think that it's okay to put our county in financial and legal jeopardy over this project? We have no idea if the current estimate for this project is going to turn out to be the right amount. We have no idea how much we're going to have to spend on this. And he's obligating the county to do this one way or another legally. How much legal expense could that be? How much legal jeopardy could that be for the county for the next 10, 15 years? So if something happens in the future that says, no, this really isn't the right way to do this project, the state, South Carolina DOT is basically saying, well, we're hands off and you can deal with it. And if you don't do it, we're not going to help you. So I don't think it's appropriate to put us into such an unknown quantity of legal and financial jeopardy. So I want Mr. Summey to answer to that.
And how many more questions do you want him and county council to answer when it comes to that contract?
Those are the main three. Why do you think that it's okay to put us in this unknown jeopardy? Especially the financial jeopardy and the legal jeopardy. Those are two things. But the third thing is, why are you trying to take money from funds that you specifically said would not go to I-526? Why aren't you talking about finding new funding? So that's very important in terms of regain the trust of the citizens of the county. I don't think it makes any sense for them to do this.
Where should that new funding come from if you were on county council today?
If they think it needs to come from taxes, then they're going to have to go to the people. Now, if they have some other funding sources through existing taxes that come through the state government, for instance, like gas taxes or any of that that's already in existence, then okay, let's talk about how to allocate those funds. But I don't think that, I think that if you really want to add on to all the projects that you've already planned for, you have to go back to the people on something this big. I mean, this is, at the very least, $305 million. And that's, a significant chunk of the 2016 sales tax revenue. So anything that we do immediately to allocate funding for I-526 that takes away from those funds delays all of those other projects. And this project won't be done for another 10 years, even if we go gung-ho right now. So we need to look at how to fix traffic problems with the short-term fixes as well. And those need to have some high priority right now.
Right now. Would you recommend another bond referendum?
I think that is, I don't know if I specifically would recommend a bond referendum at this point. It is definitely a way to go. But one of the problems I have with the bond referendums and the sales taxes is that they're very regressive. They don't take into account that people can't afford more sales tax. So if they're going to look at things like that, they need to take into account that people on lower income need to have relief on food and hygiene products and all kinds of staples in their lives. So we have to talk about what does it mean for people really when it's already difficult for them to afford to live near where they work, and so their transportation costs are higher, and now you're going to tax their food or all of their goods even more for a project that's going to impact people only in one part of the county.
Let me take you over to Mount Pleasant. You just mentioned this just recently in the interview. But if you were to talk with, say, the Mount Pleasant Water Commission, I believe, or Waterworks, I'm sorry,
Right.
about the issue about sewer, what would be your first question to them?
My first question would be to say, in terms of looking at the Snowden community issue, this is a very specific issue. They went into a contract with Mount Pleasant Waterworks 20 years ago. And my first question would be, why would you not honor this? What justification do you have for not honoring this with these people? It really comes down to that. I'm sure that there are water and sewer issues that we need to deal with across the county. But for this particular community, they were promised something, they bought into something, and they haven't gotten it for 20 years. And for you to say now that they have to annex, when before you didn't, inappropriate.
If you were to be elected on county council, what would you do on day one, describing in one word?
One word. That's a toughie. Redistricting.
Why now?
Because on day one, we have to start looking at the fact that we're going to get the 2020 census.
Right.
And we have to start planning for redistricting at the local level. I don't know if people are aware, but the state government only draws districts for the legislature and the House of Representatives.
Right.
All of the local governments draw their own district lines. And so the district I live in, if you look at it, it's pretty well gerrymandered.
Okay.
It's got a good bit of North Charleston on the east side of I-26. It goes down towards the aquarium and picks up a few precincts in Charleston, and then it goes across the river to Mount Pleasant and goes all the way out to Brickyard Plantation.
Sure.
So that seems a little odd in terms of how it would be drawn. And so I want to go back and look at the districts and talk about better ways to draw the districts that reflect the constituency and empower the voters to choose their representatives. So I would really like to look at some independent parameters and even possibility of setting up an independent panel to make recommendations for drawing the district lines, and similar to some of the legislation that's at the State House, so that we can promote more faith in our voters for how we're trying to represent them. And some of those parameters, in the legislature include not drawing districts to protect, to be partisan or to racially discriminate, or to protect people from challengers, or to protect an incumbent. We need to look at what protects the voters, not the elected officials.
Kristen French, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for dealing with all the noise and bugs and everything.
Oh, no
It's been a lot around. But we're here at Hampton Park, but thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate this.
Thank you.
You're welcome.